All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD1000 Web Development Technologies course, I've been creating a series of video presentations based on one of the textbooks we're using for this class, that being Murox JavaScript and jQuery 4th edition. I have so far, I'm still in section 1, but I've gone through the first 5 chapters, meaning I've done Introduction to Web Development, Get Started Fast with JavaScript, the essential JavaScript statements, how to work with JavaScript objects, functions, and events, how to test and debug a JavaScript application, and now I'm in Chapter 6, how to script the DOM with JavaScript. All right, I'll have that, and then how to work with images and timers, and we'll be done with the first section. So, without any further ado, as they say. All right. So how to script the DOM or document object model with JavaScript. Here are our applied and the first page of our knowledge objectives. Again, the DOM is the document object model. And to become really a very, very proficient web developer, you need to be able to program the DOM to make it do whatever it is you want it to do. So here's part 2 of the objectives. And finally, I guess that was it. Okay. So they've got here the code for a web page. All right. So this code is going to result in this DOM. Now let's look at this. Forget about this tag right here, our doc type tag. But we've got everything that's in here. If you kind of look at it as like a family. All right. The head of the family is HTML. HTML, that parent, if you want to call it, that has 2 children, a head child and a body child. That head child has a title child. That title child has text. The body has an H1 child, a form child. All right. And the H1 child has text. The form child has an ID, a name, and an action. Those are just attributes. But the form also has children. It has a label with some text. It has a text box. And it has a span. So when you look at this, that creates this. Again, HTML is at the top. Head and body are siblings right underneath. So they're direct descendants of HTML. The head has only the title with some text in it. The body has an H1 and it has a form. The H1 has just text in it. The form has a label, an input, and a span. And the label and the span each have text in them. When you get down to the bottom, here and here and here and here and here, those are sometimes known as leaf nodes because they don't go down any further. You've reached the bottom. So the DOM nodes, as it says right there, we're commonly going to use document, element, ATTR, which is short for attribute, and text. And you actually just saw some of that stuff. Some of the properties of the node interface, parent node. So again, HTML is the parent of head and body. Head is the parent of title. Body is the parent of H1 and form. Form is the parent of label, input, and span. All right. Sometimes, since these two are basically adjacent, they're referred to as siblings. These two would be siblings. Sometimes you hear that cousins here, not really very often. These would be siblings, etc. as you start making your way down through this. Notice there's a parent node, there's child nodes, first child, last child, next sibling, node value. These things are looked at as a collection of nodes. If you don't know what those are, that's kind of what this chapter is about. And text content. an HTML span element with 3 children. What are the 3 children? Well, there are actually 3. There's one here within the B tag, one here within the U tag, and one here within the I tag. And it says there how to get an element object for the span element. Well, they're showing you how you get that right there. All right. How to get the text from a span element with a nodeValue property. So you've got to look at this. For lack of better words, this is a collection of nodes. All right. Some of these nodes have properties. Some of these nodes do not have any properties. And when you start to work in here, there are different properties that you work with. All right. All right, again, part of becoming a really good web developer is the ability to peruse your way around the DOM. All right, so a lot of this stuff that's in here won't probably make a lot of sense. But if you look in here, you go ahead, B element text, B for bold. If you remember, that's what was in here, right? So we're saying span.firstChild nodeValue. What is that? That's the word welcome. Here, what is this? It's whatever in the underline. It is back. And this last one is the exclamation point. All right, so when you put them all together, that's what you get. And there's always going to be more than one way of doing this too, just so you know. All right, sometimes what's probably going to end up happening is you're going to end up going through this and figuring out what to you makes the most sense. And that's how you're going to, that's what you're going to use. So if there's more than one way of doing something, I strongly encourage you to try it more than one way. See which way makes the most sense to you. All right, there's text content. And as you'll see in a minute, there's things like inner text and there's some other stuff too. So how to set the text of the span element's first child, how to set the text of the entire span. So this, now instead of having it say welcome back, now it says hurry back. All right, here this replaces everything that was in there with just the word hi. Some of this, again, we've talked about at least a little bit already. There's query selector here, and there's query selector all. Query selector finds the first instance of something. Often it's used either with an ID, because again, typically on a well-written page, you'll have only one ID of a certain name. Not just one ID, but one ID of a certain name. But if you want to find everything, so if I want all A tags on a page, I can use the query selector all and check for the A tags. That returns what's called a node list for me. And some of the ways that things that you can work on with this are shown here. You'll notice they all have the word attribute in there. And we've talked about attribute before. You've been using attributes for a long time. For instance, when you create a form tag and you say something like action equals, and you put in double quotes, let's just say process.php or process.js or whatever. All right, that when you do that, the action is the attribute. And whatever comes after the equals in the double quotes, that's the value of that attribute. So as it says, this will allow you to create an array. Really, I think it's a node list, but it could be an array. All right, of all the anchor tags that exist. So when you look in here, now the example is very simplistic up on top here. We've got an unordered list that's got only two elements in it. All right, a picture of a lion and a picture of a tiger. All right, then we say const list equals document.querySelector. So that'll find the first image list for us. And then we use, underneath that, we use the query selector all for all the LIs. So this right here shows us the unordered list, and this right here shows us all of the list items. Now there's only two, but potentially there could be hundreds. How to test for and get an attribute. So there's the test for it, and there's getting it. And there we're assigning it to a local variable. Not only can you get an attribute, but you can set an attribute. So notice when you get it, it's on the right-hand side of an equal sign. When you set it, there is no equal sign, but it's the word set attribute. And if you don't want it there anymore, there's a remove attribute. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. If you want some kind of dull reading, go ahead and click on that. You know, right there. They're technical documents, and it's not that there's anything wrong with them. It's not that they're bad or anything like that. All right, but they're HTML DOM specifications. Some of the properties as mentioned here, available with the DOM HTML specification. I'm not going to read any of these to you. All right, but these things are going to end up being used in tandem with one another. All right. So how the DOM spec can simplify your code. And that's, you know, in the end, that's kind of at least what you're looking for in here. All right. You want to make your life as easy as possible as a programmer. Now, that said, if there's 5 ways of doing things, it's kind of going to be up to you to try all 5. And there might be more than that, but decide which of those makes the most sense to you. It won't always be the one with the least amount of code. It should be the one that intuitively makes the most sense to you. So you'll notice when you look here, there's a get and set for an image tag. All right. So here we're just grabbing that. Here we're getting it. Here we're setting it. How to get and set the same attribute with a DOM specification. Now, hopefully you look at this and you go, you know, this looks a little simpler here than here. I'd say it does. That's why you may want to take a look at this spec, because as already mentioned, there's always going to be more than one way of doing the same thing. It's just the way it is. All right, how to get the ID attribute of the first element in an array. How to get the href attribute of an anchor tag. How to set and get class attributes. The only way this will make any sense is to practice it. All right, so one of the, you know, I mean, even if you started with something simplistic like what we had here, you create this, and then in here, and just come in and play with the examples that are in the chapter. Will it make you an expert? Heck, I'm no expert on this. But the more you play with it, the better you get at it. All right. Disabling and enabling by setting something to true or to false. Now this is kind of interesting. Notice another property of the element interface. It says class list there. Well, when you are working with JavaScript and you want to be able to work with classes, the word class in JavaScript is a reserved word, and it means a class like that you create objects from. So typically where you might use class and you want to use that in conjunction with like CSS or whatever, in JavaScript you'll typically use the word class list. Okay. And again, there's just example here after example. Now, what's kind of neat about this is a lot of the stuff that they're showing in here. So again, they're telling this heading 2, they're telling you to add a class of blue, right? All right. A lot of this used to be done almost solely using jQuery. But as time has gone on, vanilla JavaScript is becoming more and more, not just popular, but more and more powerful. And a lot of the things that used to be done with jQuery no longer have to be. You can toggle classes, and a toggle is just like a light switch. If it's off, you turn it on. If it's on, you turn it off. You can check for the presence or absence of something. So again, what we saw in here was you got an introduction to the document object model. We'll look at it in more depth and breadth of coverage in class. All right. The document object model is made up of different nodes. All right. You saw the link for the DOM core specification. You looked a little bit at some DOM scripting and a little bit how you can sometimes at least make it easier using the DOM HTML specification. Now, they're going to run through some examples in here. All right. And what you see in here, at least somewhat, it's kind of like an accordion. All right. And if you click on that minus sign, what will happen is that code where it says jQuery is a library of the JavaScript functions that you're most likely to need as you develop websites, that'll go away. And this will become a plus sign, and it'll look just like this, but it'll say, what is jQuery? And it'll be blackened in color. All right. So they show you the code in here on how you can create that. The CSS for going along with it. And then the JavaScript. Now, when we look at this, a couple things. All right. As it says here, this is going to get whatever element you just clicked. All right. This will get the text that is underneath that element. And this will toggle between the minus and the plus. This will toggle between something being opened and closed. And this will make sure, because again, it's a hyperlink, that when you click on it, it doesn't go anywhere because you don't want it to. All right. So in here we come in and we're adding an event listener. So when the DOM content has been loaded, what are we doing in here? We're telling it to select all the H2 tags. And then we're coming in here and we're attaching an event handler for each one, which says when you click on it, toggle it, meaning if it was turned on, turn it off. If it was off, turn it on. And then we set the focus to the first one. That's it. Now, when you look at it that way and you think about it in that way, it actually, at least in my humble opinion, makes some sense. All right. A form in a web browser. Pretty simple form. Just an email address and a first name and a join our list. All right. So what do we have in here? Well, just take a look. Let's take a look at what's in yellow. All right. This supposedly what this means is we're bringing the list up. So it's got all that stuff in it already. We're using get as a method. All right. And the ID of this is email address, and the ID of this is first name. And the type of this button here is a submit. All right. As it says here, this is the URL that gets sent to the form when the form is submitted. Now, what comes, the question mark and what comes after it is referred to as a query string. So we're telling it here we want it to go to join.php. That's where that comes from. The email address is Grace, which is what we put in here. All right. That's the @ sign, the %40, yahoo.com. So that's the first attribute and value. Email address is the attribute. Grace@yahoo.com is the value. Ampersand means there's another value, another attribute coming. That one is called first name, and its value is Grace. All right. So as far as these attributes here, the form element, Again, name is typically something that you're going to use in accordance with server-side programming. Action is when you submit the form, what do you want to have happen? And method is going to be either get or post. Couple things. Typically, not always, but typically get is when you want to show something but not change it. Post is when you want to change something, typically, okay? And I guess that's about enough for now. So these are the terms that are related to forms right there. All right, before we go on to text box, text area, etc. All right, we're at 20 minutes, so I'm going to stop right now and pick it up in the next lecture.